Good morning. I am Dr. Sheila Caldwell, and I serve as the Southern Illinois University System Vice President for Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Conversation of Understanding. Today's conversation is part of a broader partnership between the SIU system and Young Invincibles to engage students in meaningful dialogue about their rights, experiences, and the policies that shape higher education. For years, students across our campuses have advocated for improved student life, campus safety, addressing tuition increases, dismantling discriminatory policies, and ensuring a more inclusive and representative curriculum. These conversations of understanding are designed to center those voices and create space for informed dialogue and action. Our first session, taking place today, will focus on students' right to learn. This conversation will explore the importance of protecting the freedom to study, research, and engage in dialogue without political interference, shaping what can be taught or discussed in higher education. Our second session, and we hope you will join us for that as well, will start at 1 o'clock, and it centers on the state's public funding formula and what it means for access, equity, affordability, and student success. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Troy Aleem, who serves as the engagement manager in the Midwest Regional Office of Young Invincibles. Troy leads the region's engagement efforts, including the Young Advocates Program and Youth Advisory Board. He brings nearly a decade of experience as a community organizer and activist, having worked with organizations such as the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, BYP 100, and Chicago Votes. He is also the founder of Pod Lab Studios, an innovative podcast network and media consulting business. Troy will serve as the moderator for both sessions, so please join me in welcoming Mr. Troy Aleem. Troy, thank you so much for joining us today.
I could just put it here. Yeah, I can. And the presentation is on what tab? And then this works to click through.
Oh yeah, I guess you're seeing that. I really can't tell. Are you are you all seeing the presentation?
Hit the slideshow maybe.
Where? Okay. I think
We out of port. Click through.
sure.
There we go.
There you go.
Awesome. I think we're all set. If everyone can hear me, we will go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Caldwell, for that wonderful introduction. I really, really appreciate it. And welcome everyone online and in the room to our Right to Learn workshop. It's basically about students reclaiming higher education overall. And this is part of the Conversations of Understanding series in collaboration with our wonderful partners over at SIU Systems. So like Dr. Caldwell mentioned, my name is Troy. I am the Midwest Engagement Manager for Young Invincibles. My main job is to run all of our engagement programs, as well as setting our engagement strategy for our legislative priorities. Um, and that's a little bit about me. Basically, my job is to make sure that I know what young people care about, and I'm telling my boss what that is so that we are being attentive. Quickly, a little bit about Young Invincibles. We are a national organization with 5 regional offices across the country. And we believe young people, and in particular students, are the visionaries of what's possible. Before we get into the actual presentation, I'm hoping that we can just quickly come to some group agreements. Practicing collective curiosity, being creative, and making the circle wider. All of these are basically designed to help share space with folks who may be a little bit quieter or not necessarily using their voice as much, and encouraging everyone to kind of be bold and lean into learning. We're all learning. Trust me, I am learning probably more than everybody else at the same time. Um, so in this workshop, our main goal is to really explore how higher education strengthens democracy, and we're going to also practice some tools for organizing. Really, we're going to unpack what's happening now, learning what's at stake, and again, I think one of the more important parts is practicing some of the tools that we have for this. So this is the interaction part of the presentation. When you hear right to learn, what words or what feelings come up for you? Feel free to drop into the chat or comment. But right to learn, what does that mean to you? Folks in the room can answer too. Hmm. Absolutely. Freedom and personal agency, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. And access. 100%. That one seems like an easy, obvious one, right? Access, yeah. Not being forced to learn things based on the current political climate. You hit it right on the head. This is how we define the right to learn. For us, the right to learn means that students have the freedom to study, research, and speak without political interference, dictating what can be taught or discussed in higher education. Students have been advocating for the right to learn for centuries. So let's give a little historical context. I'm not going to read through every single bit of this, but generally, when we think of higher education, when it very first started, it was about knowledge kind of being passed down, not necessarily discovered, right? Higher ed used to be about knowledge transmission. The professor speaks and you listen. There wasn't really any room for like discovery or new ideas or dissent, even. But student activism actually changed all of that. One of the things that I always like to highlight, what's commonly known as the very first student protest, actually was not about any war. It was about food on campus. We can all relate to that, right? Students launched the Butter Rebellion at Harvard, literally about the quality of the food that they were getting. And that is literally known as like the very first kind of student protest, student organized dissent. So that's a very, very important one. We thank them every day for the work that they did. So generally, student protest movements have pushed for some pretty specific things, right? Generally, specifically, I should say, about campus life, right? Improving student life, campus safety, fighting tuition hikes, discriminatory practices, demanding inclusive curriculum. Student protest movements obviously have affected their own college campuses and what happens there. But historically, they have also pushed for change outside of the institutional walls. When we think about the Green Feather movement, this was one of the early, how do I want to say this, economic disparity protests that existed, but it also had to do with McCarthyism and censorship, kind of following along the times. And then the landmark kind of court case, Dixon v. Alabama, this is the court case that basically eliminated the concept of the college replacing your parents, right? So this changed the nature of how students and their institution relate, making it unlawful for schools to violate student rights. And this was the very first time that this was kind of established, known, and put into practice back in 1961. A little bit more history of campus activism that existed outside of just affecting the campus, right? We're all very familiar with civil rights movement, anti-war protests, Most famously, I think, when I was doing my research, is the Kent State situation, where 4 folks were actually killed by the National Guard. Widespread use of tear gas, right? Dogs, fire hoses, kind of the things that we see when we think about that era, in like footage and things like that. But that was happening on campuses, has been happening on campuses for a really long time. We go from thinking about Take Back the Night, which started in 1973. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar, but this is the largest demonstration against sexual violence, and that actually still happens on campuses today. And then South African apartheid, this divestment movement, students all over the country kind of organized protests, sit-ins, demonstrations. All of these efforts culminated in divestment by universities and the passage of the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act, the AAP. If y'all don't know, if you try to research it, it says the AAP. It's hard to find. But this also led to economic sanctions against South Africa. So think about that power. Demonstrating on your campus locally, overseas, was able to help our country understand, all right, this is not right. Students are speaking. We need to do something about it. And as a result, it led to the economic sanctions against South Africa. Let's see. So a little bit more current for the younger folks in the room. Some of these might have happened in your lifetime, right? We think about the Occupy movement, Million Student March, Black Lives Matter, anti-genocide divestment movement that's happening now. Students have always been using their power to force universities and their communities to align with their values. Again, today we see this a lot with the Black Lives Matter die-ins, which are actually still happening right now, and a lot of the anti-genocide divestment movements, which shockingly are very similar to the anti-apartheid divestment protests that were happening then. History repeats itself. So let's think about SIU's campus. There were 2 kind of protests or events that kind of stood out in history for me as I was looking through and kind of researching. Are y'all familiar with the Bucket Brigade in 1949? So in 1949, President Dwight Morris had just kind of taken over, and he had a huge surge of students on campus because it was right after the war. So a lot of folks were enrolling in school, trying to go to college. And what President Morris did was he encouraged those influx of students to actually march and protest, right? He encouraged them to actually use buckets, march through campus and through town so that they could demand that the state legislature provided more funding. They were dealing with housing space crisis and classroom size crisis. So they did, with the blessing of the president at the time. And that actually led to a huge investment in the system by the state, and actually facilitated it growing from just a small teachers college to now a world-renowned research institution. So again, we see how activism, and particularly student activism, is a catalyst for not only policy change, but real worldwide global change as well. So I wanted to highlight a case study specifically from SIU that was around the student athlete activism ban in 2018. I found this to be a very interesting case, a very powerful demonstration of student activism and institutional change all at once. So let's kind of go through what this situation was. So this all started, well, it started because they had to protest something, so it started before that. But it really started with Serena Tinker and Alasia Brandy, who were cheerleaders at SIU at the time. They took a knee to protest police brutality and fight for civil rights. This was somewhat of a trend at the time, following Colin Kaepernick's kneeling in the NFL and subsequently getting blackballed from the league. But folks during this time were commonly taking a knee to kind of protest silently against police brutality and generally civil rights. So after that situation where those cheerleaders knelt, the university attempted to ban any display of activism for student athletes. They created a policy, and the policy read as follows. It is a privilege and not a right to be a student athlete, cheerleader, or spirit member at Southern Illinois University. Members of the department, including student athletes, cheerleaders, and spirit members, must remain neutral on any issue political in nature when wearing SIU official uniforms and when competing or performing in official Department of Athletics events and activities. Any display, verbal or nonverbal, of activism, either for or against a political issue, will not be tolerated and may result in dismissal from the program. Basically, this policy was asking for political neutrality in a like really nice way, but it is also kind of suppressing the voices of its students at the same time. So what did people think? Not we. There are a variety of stakeholders and entities involved in creating the policy, passing the policy. Here's some reactions from a few different folks after the policy was passed. A couple of the cheerleaders who knelt felt like the protest, it's not a protest against the flag, it's not a protest against Donald Trump, it was a protest for our civil rights that we are still fighting for. Zarina said, I did it because we still haven't had justice against police brutality. And Alasia said, because it's such a controversial thing and how people are upset that we aren't standing for the flag because they feel like we are disrespecting America, it shows awareness and brings attention to our cause. So until the problems are solved, we're going to continue to kneel. Shout out to Alasia. Liz Jarnigan, who is the former SIU director of athletics, uh, she said it's not the appropriate place and we are not wanting to make political statements of any kind when we're representing the university. We have this policy because we're wanting to put forward a message of unity, and by taking sides, the rest of that quote is, that's not unity. We also heard from the Director of Communications and Public Policy at the ACLU of Illinois, Ed Yonka. Southern Illinois University's new policy falls short of the critical responsibility of a public university to honor and protect free speech rights for their students. Remember that case in Alabama that I mentioned earlier. He continues, the central purpose for any public university is to engage students and the community in the issues of our time. Schools should not threaten students or hide them away because they engage in protests that some in the community may not agree with. And then finally, Professor Freivogel, I've been messing his name up this whole time, media law professor at SIU says the government can make neutral rules for students, but in the process, the government can't discriminate based on the content or viewpoint of speech. The university cannot punish a student leader for taking a knee during the anthem if the school is also not prepared to punish pro-flag, pro-military, or Tim Tebow style religious gestures. So it's kind of pointing out the double standard, right? You can't have it one way without having it the other way. If you're going to let students express themselves and their thoughts and their opinions and their political views in some ways, then you got to let them do it in all ways. So what was the result? What happened? It was a big controversy. The students were loud, not just the students, the community, the folks that they organized, the student base, there were staff and faculty and admin, all in support. And the result, that policy lasted 48 hours. If you, when I was reading the policy, you could tell the law department put in some time in there, right? There was a lot of work, I think, put into creating that policy. But think about the power of student activism. Again, 48 hours later, that policy was eliminated pretty quick. So another engagement point in the presentation, right? The policy was rescinded within a very short time of its approval. What type of precedent would be set if it was not reversed? And what precedent is the reversal setting now? Feel free to add into the chat, or folks in the room, you can contribute as well. Mm, yep. Exactly. Yeah, it kind of sets up that anytime the institution gets uncomfortable, they kind of get leeway to suppress certain things or elevate certain things also in the same name, right? Kind of gives them the autonomy to judge, pick and choose, and not necessarily setting them up to be fair, right? We don't want to just accuse people of not being fair, but setting that up that way doesn't necessarily open up a runway for fairness, right? What precedent is the reversal setting now? How is that helping now? Yes. People have a voice and they're not afraid to use it. I can't say they're not afraid to use it because students are still dealing with repercussions for using them. Um, but because that precedent was set, it at least demonstrated that even if there is a policy created, if students stand up and organize and fight and use their voices, engage in conversation, discuss the actual problem with leadership, then it actually can be changed. And I think that's important, right? I think that's an important lesson too, right? Life ain't always going to be fair, but you can always do something about it. The next question that I have is thinking about comprehensively, both on campus and outside of campus. Does a right to learn only exist within formal educational settings like our lectures or our classrooms? And what role do public universities have in engaging students in current affairs? Yep, 100%.
To engage students in all type of issues, even when it creates target distance.
100%. One of the things that I always love, especially in Illinois, our public universities are really embedded in the communities that they're in, right? So learning can't be restricted to the campus, especially given the nature of the relationship that our campuses have with the communities that they're in. So even just immediately stepping right off campus, right? There's a lot that can be done in communities, et cetera. And I think that the public universities play a huge role in allowing that, right? Making sure that they're not setting a precedence of um, stamping out dissent or stamping out people using their voices, whether it's beneficial or harmful to the institution itself. I think the main point is the right to learn, right? The right to express yourself and the freedom to be able to do so. Yes. 100%. And that's the role of a university, right? Is to give you tools. You do what you need to do with the tools, but it's our role to give you those tools and make sure you know how to use them. All right, so there are parallels in all of these student movements, right? You can sum it up by calling it authoritarian backlash. Similar, the things that are similar in all of the movements that I've discussed so far, the ways that it has been attempted to be stamped out is pretty similar, right? We talk about free speech suppression. We talk about policing, surveillance, and targeting students who dissent. Passing legislation to limit teaching about race, gender, and sexual orientation. Cutting funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Harmful narratives of students. Threatening to defund universities themselves that support diversity or allow student protests and encampments. And then deputizing the National Guard, which has led to the deaths of student activists. So we kind of know the playbook already, right? We already know what the response is going to be when student voices are starting to get really, really loud. But these are some of the lessons learned from student protest movements. And Dr. Caldwell, to your point, education is both theory and practice. Hopefully, you get your theory in class and you're able to practice out in your community. And I think that is the role of the institution, is to kind of play that middleman and equip you to do both. We also know that activism is foundational to education and the college experience. This is really the first place that young adults get to express themselves freely, right? They're away from their parents' homes a lot of times. They're on their own a lot of times for the first time, and getting around their peers and sharing and new ideas, crafting their own ideas, becoming who they are as people. This is where that happens, right? College is where all of that human development happens. And this is also where we understand how powerful activism can be, not just for protesting for better food or larger classrooms, but those skills that you learn as a student activist translate to being an advocate for yourself in the workplace, and many, many other places. We also know that history teaches us to resist. We know that an unjust law should not be followed, right? This is something that we know. We also know that we have a responsibility that when unjust laws or unjust policies are created, that we do use our voice to shut them down. So, protests are not the only way to make change in the higher education system. There's a bunch of other ways that we can do this. We talk about inside the system, outside the system. There's a bunch of different ways that we can do this and elevate our voices. What are some ways that you think that you can make your voices heard even louder on campus, besides just protesting? Yes, that was the very first answer I was looking for. Student trustees have a lot of power. You're entrusted to represent the student base. Student trustee, right? You're being trusted to represent the interests of the student body. It's a very, very powerful position, and 100% a way to make not only your, but your peers' voices loud as well. One of the things that we talk about at Young Invincibles, specifically because we engage with young people all the time, is talking to decision makers. So sometimes this can be intimidating, it can seem difficult. Folks in leadership sometimes are not the easiest to reach, and they're also very, very busy, busy people. But I think a lot of times what students come to realize is they do have a voice and that those folks are there to listen to them, right? The challenge is to figure out how to get in front of them. And I think that's on the students to figure out, right? It is on them to figure out, okay, this person is in charge of this decision. They have these meetings that they actually listen to public comment from students. Let's make sure we take advantage of that opportunity, right? And then being in those spaces, speaking effectively, using your experience as your knowledge base, right? That's when those conversations, I think, get to start happening in real fruitful ways. And it's not just a situation where admin is forced to have you in a room and listen to you, but we're not really going to do anything. We just got to make sure you're here. Transforming that relationship to, hey, students, what do y'all need? Right? What can we do? How do we proactively support you? And it really just kind of changes the relationship. I do have another exercise that we're not necessarily going to go through today, but it's a demonstration of how easy it is to come up with ideas and ways to become an activist. I go through a scenario where you come across one of your fellow students or someone on campus who's hungry, right? And then how do we solve that problem? And a lot of that, almost none of that, solving that problem would involve a protest, right? But it's still a lot of it using your voice as a student to help create some change, or even on a small scale, helping a classmate. So for us, this Right to Learn campaign that we are working on as an organization is informed by student protest movements. We have a whole cycle of things that we're trying to do, a whole ecosystem. I think it starts with student leadership development with events like these, kind of talking about the right to learn overall, what is the concept, and then diving deep into those concepts on campuses, and then equipping students to kind of lead the organizing, the engagement, the public education, the stakeholder education in that. We also know how important building coalitions are. So we are launching a national coalition of youth serving organizations. We're going to be aligning on strategies, amplifying our collective impact, and coordinating advocacy across the country. Narrative change campaigns. This is something that is very near and dear to Young Invincibles' hearts. We are a storytelling organization. So elevating student stories through our digital campaigns, our student journalists, and our press partnerships, we're going to be reshaping this conversation about the right to learn. I think a lot of folks right now in the general public discourse, I think it may be limited to diversity, equity, and inclusion and CRT. But through this narrative change, we're going to try to expand that and reshape everyone's understanding of what this concept is, the freedom to learn what you want to learn on campus. And then, of course, for anybody who has done any work like this before, we all know how important data is as well. So we're also going to be doing some research and evaluation, some polling, message testing, and evaluating our programs to make sure that we are not just responding to a moment, but setting ourselves for long-term change. Let's see. Oh, very last, I think this is my last couple of slides coming up. So currently, the threats to the right to learn that we are dealing with nationally, also here in Illinois in a big way, it's a polycrisis for democracy and higher education. There's a bunch of stuff going on at the same exact time. Also, it's happening at the same exact time on purpose, just in case you didn't know. But we're dealing with an assault on civil rights, simultaneously the breakdown of institutional autonomy while targeting the right to learn and academic freedom by also attacking things like critical race theory, gender and sexual orientation, DEI, threats to ethnic studies departments and curricula. So if you think about all of the things that are happening right now, this is just on the institutional level. I'm not even talking about targeting students or anything like that. This is just what institutions are dealing with right now, right? Professors are worried about their own safety in allowing certain conversations, let alone facilitating certain conversations. We've seen institutions be threatened to have their federal funding removed if they don't change the name of certain departments or remove certain words from certain publications that they have. And really, overall, what it comes down to is that authoritarian backlash again, and really trying to control the quote unquote narrative that an institution allows their students to even explore. Right. And so that's kind of the other end of it. It's like, yes, students, use your voice. We have a long, long history of student activism creating change. But I don't necessarily think we've seen institutions' autonomies threatened in the same way before. And I think that's unique, and it's an opportunity for us to kind of raise that and elevate that, and hopefully stop it as soon as possible. There's actually a couple more discussion questions. So why do you think these attacks keep happening to higher education, both then and now? Why does it keep happening? One hundred percent. Right.
So you can kind of, hamper that entire end, you really can do it throughout society. So I think it's always going to continue to be a place of attack.
Right.
Because you're attacking ideas, you're attacking mind.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I think that, yeah, you summed it up perfectly. When we think of higher education, when we think of college, when we think of a college campus, higher education institutions, I mentioned it earlier, this is where you become who you are as a person, right? This is where you learn yourself. This is where you learn what you care about, what you don't care about, right? What you're passionate about, what you're not passionate about. My dad always said college is where you find out what you would do for free if you could, right? We can't do nothing for free nowadays, but this is where you learn that, right? This is where you come into that. That exploration is the most dangerous thing for really any system that wants to perpetuate itself. It cannot afford new ideas. It cannot afford new ways of thinking and approaching problems. It cannot afford um, young people being young people and coming up with great ideas and new ways to approach challenges because it threatens the institution's existence in and of itself, right? When you allow for that kind of discourse to openly exist, you're really opening yourself up to potentially those same exact students taking you down, right? But what we also know is that very rarely happens. Usually, the most supportive campuses have very cooperative relationships between admin, faculty, staff, and their students. I think SIU is actually a great example of that. We'll see some data a little bit later on that kind of speaks to that. But that is why this is happening, right? Institutions like this are supporting their students. They're allowing them to learn and grow and express themselves, and that's scary for for a system that is established, right? Oh, I'm actually into the data already. So here are some results from the very recent campus climate survey, I think from this year, right? Just a month ago. So this is brand new data. I pulled out, say again, hot off the presses. Yes, hot, very hot off the presses. Yeah, you guys are seeing this for the very first time. So I pulled out a couple of data points that I think speak to conversations we've been having so far, and kind of speaks to what's happening right here on SIU East campus. Um, the first data point that I pulled out was a question about faculty accepting your points of view, even if they disagree with them. Overwhelmingly, students seem to agree or strongly disagree with this at a rate of about 66%, with only 7% disagreeing or strongly disagreeing. And I think on this one, there were, yeah, the neutral numbers was neutral and not available numbers weren't huge. So this disparity actually, I think, is a pretty accurate thing to kind of point at, right? Students definitely feel that in having conversations with faculty, even if they don't necessarily agree, they at least feel safe to express those viewpoints and have them accepted, not just shunned or dismissed. I think that's very important and speaks to the climate that students feel that they're in. The other one that I pulled out, I think this one is very interesting and timely. The question was, or the statement was, the welfare of our institution takes precedence over donor demands, investment matters, and political views. This disparity is not as wide as the previous disparity. And I think that's interesting. About 40% of folks agree or strongly agree with this statement. Almost 20% disagree or strongly disagree. So it's still a pretty wide gap. But one might expect, based on the previous data point, that that gap would be a little bit wider. What do y'all think that that speaks to? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all three campuses. Mm-hmm. For sure. For sure. Um, sure. Yeah. So that was gonna be my reaction too. I think if I was a student and I was not super aware of donor demands and investment matters, the part of this question or statement that stands out is political views. And so automatically my mind and my eyes are drawn to that. And whatever my experience about being a student on campus and my political views is going to affect how I answer this question. What we also know is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, this had one of the higher neutral and did not respond answers as well. So I think that speaks to maybe not understanding the question and maybe specifically focusing on the political views part of that. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Then, like literally in the newspaper last week, they had somebody in the center of campus just saying all types of disparaging things about women,
Mhm.
about ethnic minorities, about LGBTQIA. So if we were like, the welfare takes precedence of a political view legally,
Right.
in some ways it can,
Right.
right? So that's kind of why we even have you like,
Yeah.
so we talk about free speech and what our judiciary responsibilities are and legally, what could also be perceived as hate speech. It's unfortunate that we still have to allow some, um, parts of those things to happen. Because
For sure.
we can't- we're neutral, we have to be neutral across the board.
Exactly.
Like, this is clearly hate, so you can't be, we don't agree with it.
Right.
But we have to make space for it, even though we don't want to make space.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great point, and I think that even the fact that that's a conversation had with the students is important, right? Whether they understand it or not, but even just to speak to that to the students, I think is very important. I don't necessarily think that a lot of students understand that the role of the institution is the welfare part, right? It's not controlling what's being said. So a lot of times, in my experience, when having conversations with students to help them understand that, what I try to tell them is the role of the university is to make sure that you are not harmed, right? That does not necessarily extend to your mental harm by words that you don't agree with. It really extends to your physical well-being, you being threatened to exist or live or be on campus, and doesn't necessarily extend to just simple opinions. Now, there's a very big difference between hate speech and opinions, and that's the role of the university to identify that. But I don't think necessarily students understand that. I think what they think is I should be able to say what I want to say, and if I am being harmed or if people are disagreeing with me, then I need to be protected. Um, but it's the thought that counts. Literally, we're protecting your thought, right? Your ability to think and express yourself versus any one subject or content. Another analogy that I typically will talk to young people when you have a 501c3 organization, which is a government designation, right? A nonprofit organization, you typically have to stay um, nonpartisan. I don't know why that word skipped me. So you can't necessarily endorse any candidates, but you can talk about any issue that you want. And it's kind of similar for institutions if you think about it. You could talk about whatever you want, but we have to protect anybody who's talking and their right to do so. Um, so yes, let me see. I think I got one more data slide. Yes, this one particularly is about political views and where folks feel comfortable sharing those political views on campus. So in terms of literally sharing your views on campus, we see about 41% of students agree or strongly disagree. 20% of students disagree or strongly disagree with being able to openly express my political views on campus. Dr. Caldwell, I think this directly speaks to what you were talking about. Some folks may um, I actually have a specific situation in mind where some students applied for like a permit to protest. They missed the deadline, and another group had applied and got the date, and they felt like that was discrimination, and they felt like, oh, the institution is fighting against us. They don't want us to express our political views, and that 100% could skew some data, right? So this is about experience, I think, and not necessarily the actual reality of what exists. Um, but still, 41% of folks feeling like they can openly express their views on campus. This is really about navigating their peers, right? And really feeling safe to do so on campuses. The next one that I pulled out was I can openly express my political views in the classroom. This one I think explicitly speaks to the right to learn piece. I do not believe so. The data here says 36% agree or strongly disagree, or strongly agree, and then about half of that, 18% disagree or strongly disagree. My hunch is that this data point or this question particularly is a hot button because of the campaign we're working on right now. I think a lot of folks don't know what they can or cannot say in the classroom. I think a lot of folks don't know what's okay or not okay to teach in the classroom. And so specifically when you get in the classroom, it's a bit more controlled than randomly out on campus and being able to spark up conversation. You also have a quote unquote adult in the room that's supposed to be monitoring it. Those conversations can change and be a little bit more sensitive. Um, and based on the political climate right now, it might not be safe for students to feel like they can express themselves. So I have a hunch that is where that particular number comes from. And then lastly, I pulled out my political views are respected by faculty. This one had the largest disparity, I think, with 40% agreeing or strongly disagreeing, and only 8% disagreeing or strongly disagreeing. I felt that this was one of the more fascinating data points for me. It seems like students actually feel respected and honored and uplifted and seen and heard by faculty. You would think that if folks overall felt like the campus wasn't supportive, or if they felt like they couldn't express themselves in the classroom, or there were certain admins that wouldn't let them speak, then that would trickle over to the faculty. But not necessarily here. Folks feel very, very supported by faculty. I think that's just a testament to the great work that you all obviously are doing in the system. Let's see, my next slide. So the next piece is really more of a group activity. This works better when we have folks in the room that can go out into breakout groups. So we won't necessarily do the actual activity, but I do want to highlight what we're looking at here, right? We're approaching the toolbox, right? What are the tools that we can incorporate to help defend our right to learn? And it starts with a concept of understanding what the counter strategies are, right? Remember that authoritarian backlash that I was speaking of earlier? All of those different tactics that they may use. They're categorized, right? They have um, genres, right? It's a playbook, literally. There are typically 5 ways that the right to learn is typically disrupted by an institution. We think about controlling the narrative, right? This shapes what can be taught, researched, or discussed, putting sanctions or punishments or anything punitive on things that may be seen outside of what is acceptable by controlling the narrative, right? Certain words like genocide not being allowed to be used, for example. Another tactic we hear is that we see is defund and privatize. I think this directly is spoken to, for example, in the Project 2025 of defunding and privatizing education. For example, the Department of Education and the attacks that are happening on it. Thinking about how is power being shifted to corporate interests, to private interests, and less in the public domain, right? Also discrediting higher education. So this is an attempt to frame colleges as elitist or radical, extreme, all of these different things, and undermining the civic responsibility that a higher education institution actually has. Um, I keep seeing data. This might be post-COVID data or folks want to be streamers and internet personalities. But there's data coming out that like young people have less and less confidence in the value of a higher education. However, what we know is higher education is still the best way for economic mobility. It is still the best way to remove yourself out of poverty. It is still the best way to increase your income, to own a house, to own property, right? Like it is still the best way to do that. What happened to the narrative? When did that start shifting? When did that start changing? That discredit. And I think we've seen it over the years in different parts in our in history. But that is also another tactic. Did you have? Yes. Hmm.
Event and somebody, one of the underfunded education secretaries actually brought this point up. But, we should be skeptical about this new data.
Yes.
Data that says higher education is actually trusted more than churches are,
Yep.
right? And I think that's consistent because a lot of people have experiences with higher education and even some of the data you show that people can freely express themselves. So I do think it's this data points that are not honestly true that are coming out trying to give the impression that people no longer trust higher ed and we're not doing a good job. And again, I think it's because of the political climate.
Yep.
Don't trust them, trust us.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we always got to question the numbers. I remember when I was a kid, there was a saying, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. I can't use that. Exactly, you got it. Uh, but we can't use we can't even use that lyric anymore, right? Because numbers be lying sometimes, depending on how you frame it. Which is one of the reasons why we feel like narrative change is such a big, important tactic to fight back with. Two more approaches that I think are important to highlight is suppressing student power. This one is a huge one. So limiting organizing, limiting protests, and limiting all kind of action, any kind of collective action that challenges power structures. This one for me is one of the more concerning pieces, and this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of students don't engage in activism because it's dangerous, right? Like it's risky. It can be, especially when we know that there are entire entities invested in discrediting these students, right? So putting them in positions where their academic standing is threatened, putting them in positions where they got arrested for a protest and now they're not available for finals. These things are tactical and strategic. They're done on purpose. There's an example of a young student leader in Chicago who was arrested and went missing after being arrested for weeks. If y'all know anything about Chicago Police Department, that's not super surprising, but it does happen, and that's a thing. Um, so like that's a real like threat that I think a lot of students even minimally are at least aware of. Like this kind of dangerous. And then divide and distract. I think this one starts leaning into muddying the waters of the higher education institution's responsibility, right? But when we weaponize conversations about race, gender, and sexuality, when we maybe lean into the more extreme values of any one side and elevate those to try to create a stark contrast to a differing opinion, right? Basically widening the gap and making sure that folks aren't aligning where their interests do. So those are 5 kind of tactics that we see all the time. It's a general playbook. Fortunately, we have history books now, so we can kind of try to plan and instead of reacting, kind of proactively respond to these types of threats. And that's what the rest of the exercise is. Basically, we'll put folks in groups, give examples of how each of these different tactics are being used on this campus and by who. And then we kind of just walk through that and discuss it. And then I have one other breakout group conversation where we're basically kind of talking about our experiences with this very exact topic and trying to pull out of folks what their own experiences have been. Hopefully, after this conversation, they might have had an experience where you might reflect and say, you know what, my right to learn actually was kind of threatened in that situation. I didn't even realize it. So this is designed to kind of bring folks together, have a conversation, try to boil some of those experiences up, and then hopefully, as a larger group, we're able to kind of come up with some solutions. Um, I'm always going to try to get people to start planning campaigns and doing stuff, right? Talking to people. But that is what this group activity is designed to do. It's to kind of bring up those ideas and those experiences that folks are dealing with. I believe, yes, that is pretty much the end of my portion of the presentation. We do have our action page where you can send letters to your representatives. All you have to do is go to the Young Invincibles website, find Share Your Story, put your zip code in, and a letter is already pre-populated. You can customize the letter if you want to, obviously, but we also want to make sure that folks can easily reach out to their representatives. Yeah, younginvincibles.org, share your story, simple as that. Thank you. I think it's time for lunch now. So we're going to take a little bit of a break, and when we return, we will enter into the equitable funding formula portion of the conversation. Thank you so much. I appreciate y'all.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Sheila Caldwell, and I serve as the Southern Illinois University System Vice President for Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer. And it is my pleasure again to welcome you to today's Conversation of Understanding. And this conversation is part of a broader partnership between the SIU System Office as well as the Young Invincibles to engage students in meaningful dialogue about their rights, experiences, and the policies that shape higher education. For years, students across our campuses have advocated for improved student life, campus safety, addressing tuition increases, dismantling discriminatory policies, and ensuring a more inclusive and representative curriculum. These conversations of understanding are designed to center those voices and create space for informed dialogue and action. At this time, it is my pleasure to reintroduce Troy Aleem. He actually was here earlier for our 10:30 session on the students' right to learn. And for those of you who were not in the room, you did not miss it. You can go to our SIU System YouTube channel and learn more about your legal rights to learn. And I highly encourage you to do just that. It was an excellent session. I myself learned quite a bit. So please, when you get a chance, check out our System YouTube channel. But again, Troy Lane is the engagement manager in the Midwest Regional Office of Young Invincibles. He leads the region's engagement efforts, including the Young Advocates Program and Youth Advisory Board. He brings nearly a decade of experience as a community organizer and activist, having worked with organizations such as the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, BYP 100, and Chicago Votes. He is also the founder of PodLab Studios, an innovative podcast network and media consulting business. So as we begin our next session, I would like to again invite Troy to return and share more about the work of the Young Invincibles, including how students can stay engaged through their initiatives and advocacy efforts. And he will also serve as our primary facilitator to frame our 1 o'clock session that you are here for today. And the topic is the state public funding formula and its impact on access, equity, and student success. So again, we're very pleased to have you. Please feel free to refresh yourselves and eat as you need throughout our session. Thank you for being here. And Troy, thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. Welcome in, and thank you, Dr. Caldwell, for that wonderful introduction. Before I begin, I just always like to remind people to get food and drinks when they're available. Take advantage. Food's expensive. Go and get some. Um, but yes, my name is Troy Aleem. I am the Midwest Engagement Manager for Young Invincibles. Young Invincibles is a national nonprofit organization that works on economic opportunities that affect young adults ages 18 to 34 in the areas of healthcare, higher education, workforce development, and civic engagement. Our job is to basically elevate the voices of young adults and make sure we are expanding economic opportunity for our generation. We, Young Invincibles, are a member of a coalition called the Coalition to Transform Higher Education Funding here in the state of Illinois. We are committed to making sure that higher education is affordable and accessible to all Illinois students. So with that, one of the things that we have been doing is working to create an equitable funding formula in the state of Illinois, which would affect how our public universities receive state funding. Unfortunately, this is not my area of expertise. Mine was earlier today. You can catch me on YouTube if you wanted to see that part. But I am not going to leave you all hanging. I do have an actual expert who has been, I would almost say, single-handedly responsible for kind of working out the kinks of this formula. So without further ado, I will introduce Mike Abrahamson, who is the Director of Policy and Research at the Partnership for College Completion.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and no, it's been great working hand in hand with you and YI on this for, I want to say 7.5 years now. It's been in the making.
Yeah, it's been quite a while.
Yeah,
Yep.
and on this first slide, I'll show you what the problem is. So you can see why we've been so focused on this issue for so long.
Hang on, Mike, one
Yep.
second. We're trying to get the volume a little louder, just because you're a tiny bit quiet.
No worries. I can try to switch my microphone too if it's helpful, but
Give me like 1 second. It's funny, you all. I do. Dr. Caldwell mentioned that I work. I founded a PodLab Studios, which is a podcast and media consulting company. So I know how to fix audio. Trust me. But y'all stuff is expensive, and I'm not breaking nothing. So we gonna wait on the pros.
Is this better or worse if I use this microphone?
I think
Or
it's
the
about the
same.
same. I don't think it's on your end. I think it's just the speakers in the room.
okay, sounds good.
Don't see anybody. Okay. Let's do. All right. I'm gonna ask y'all to do something. You can't get mad at me. If you want to scoot up so you can hear a little bit better, please don't be annoyed. I know y'all look so comfortable sitting down. All right. I think we got folks a little bit closer now. You could go ahead and start, Mike.
All right. Can you guys hear me okay? I can try to
A
speak
little
up
bit
too.
better, yeah.
Okay. So let's go to the next slide, and I will talk more about the problem. So there we go. Maybe another slide or two ahead, actually. Here we go. This one. Oh, one more. Let's look at these charts. Okay, got it. So basically, we don't think of the last 30 years as being a particularly good couple decades for investing in higher education from our states around the country. But if you actually look around the country at how much of a state's revenue they're spending on higher education, it's been around 15%, up and down a little bit. That's that purple line on the top left. Illinois, however, we've gone from almost being around there at 13% in the mid to late 90s to now we spend just over 2% of our state revenue on higher education. We've almost completely disinvested in our public colleges and universities. And as you can see here, that looks like from our universities, that blue line there on the right side of the chart, that's going way, way down. You can see the budget crisis of 2015, 2016 there, which is kind of its own separate story with its own negative effects on our state. But as you can see, we've cut our public university appropriations to universities in half, basically, over the last 20 years. And we've seen university tuition triple over that time period. Now, one last thing I'll point out here is if you can see just eyeball the last 5 or 6 years there, where tuition actually has gone down, universities are trying as hard as they can to keep tuition affordable for students. And they've made some progress, right? And we've seen university tuition go down and level out a little bit, but it's leveled out at a level that's untenably high for many, many students. So what's been the effect of that? Well, basically, actually, let's go to the next slide. And you can see here how that translates to tuition and fees. In Illinois, we see those being about $5,000 more than the national average. Particularly in the 2010s, we were among the most expensive states in the country, particularly for lower income students, particularly at our regional universities. So the 10 universities in Illinois that aren't Research One institutions, basically. We were among the highest in the country, and we saw the greatest enrollment declines of any state in the country for those students. We saw tens of thousands of students being priced out of Illinois universities, thousands of students going to other states, but even more concerningly, an unknowable amount of students who just decided to not go anywhere at all. For students who do attend schools in Illinois now, it requires going to a public university requires almost 20% of your household income, which is 6th highest of all states. Again, it is untenably high for far too many students from Illinois. And the way that we support our students is backward. So on the next slide, you can see how much our universities spend on academic and student supports. We've got 2 universities here, University A and University B. We very helpfully left them anonymous here, but as you can probably guess, University B is one of our Research One flagship institutions, right? University A is one of our regional universities. And what we know is our regional universities enroll greater percentages of low-income students and students of color. And we know that students, underrepresented students, we need to spend more resources and funding in order to make sure that those students graduate at equitable rates. What we see is the opposite. At our regional universities, which have less resources, they're more reliant on the state. They've always had less to spend on academic and student support services. So you can see from 2014 how there was a $5,000 gap in spending. That has actually grown. So now there's an $8,000 gap between the best funded and the least funded universities. Essentially, the best funded universities, which again enroll the lowest percentages of students of color and students from low income backgrounds, have about 3 times as much to spend on their student bodies than the students that, or than the institutions that have less resources, like University A. So, what is our current funding model? This slide is a really easy one. Actually, we don't have one. So there you go. We just give out money based on however we gave out money last year. And we've done that for the last 20 years or more, 25 years, dating back to about the year 2000. There's no explanation for why we gave out money in this way in the first place. And basically, the best explanation is just that these are political negotiations, that people go into a room and they said, hey, like, who has the most lobbying power here? And that's kind of how we distributed our funding. We've given it out, money out since then that way. So though we give out less every year, we still say, okay, we'll give out a 1% across the board increase or a 2% across the board decrease. It's always across the board, meaning that if your institution got 20% of the state appropriations last year, they're going to get 20% next year, regardless of what you need. There's just no system in place. So that brings us to the solution. This is SB 13 and HB 1581. I am very proud to present this solution for a couple reasons. One, as Troy and I were talking about, we've been working for years on this. And when I say we're talking about dozens of experts from around the state at universities, including representatives from your university, higher education funding experts we brought in the states that are considered to be leading, and we asked them the tough questions about how we should have our model. We met 57 times over the course of like 2 years. A lot of these are like 3 and 4 hour long meetings too. So trust me, we talked about this. More surprising than just how much talking we did about this is the solution that we came to, which truly represents policy innovation, right? We would be the first, or I should say we will be, once we pass and fund this, the first state in the country to fund our universities this way, in a way based on adequacy, equity, and stability. So adequacy, where this funding model would give universities what they need to serve their students. Equity, it would allow them to narrow and ultimately eliminate these disparities that we see in enrollment and retention graduation among subgroups, and stability. I add one thing here, which is accountability and transparency. Throughout this process, we realized that when we're advocating for substantial reinvestment in our institutions, we know that that's what has to happen, but also for the good of students, for the good of taxpayers, for the good of the institutions themselves, it's extremely important that we hold institutions accountable for spending that funding on what will actually move the needle to get more students to and through college in a more equitable way. So how does this actually work? It's complex. I will try to explain it as simply as possible, and hopefully, you can hear and understand this, but also I welcome any questions. Basically, there are 3 steps here. The first step is we calculate what each university needs to serve its students. We do that by looking at all of what our universities are currently spending across 6 categories. Those include core instruction, academic and student supports, operations and maintenance. There's 6 of these categories. We looked in depth at their spending, and we calculated that across all of our universities, and then looked at our current graduation rate, which is about 63% in aggregate across our universities. Then we looked at the research, and that's going to be a common thing I'm going to say. We looked at the research and said, how much additional funding would we need to bring up our graduation rate as a state or as our state universities from 63% to a benchmark of 70%. We calculate that for each university. But we also know, as I mentioned before, we have disparities in the students that in equity and how we're enrolling students, and in persistence and graduation rates and numbers among students. So we, again, looked at the research to say how much additional funding would we need to start narrowing and eliminating those gaps. We look at each university and calculate both of those things, right? How much do we need for adequacy and how much do we need for equity? And we have a number. We come up with a number for each university called an adequacy target, how much money each university needs. But then we have to look at how much each university already has. For that, we create a resource profile. There's 2 things that go into the resource profile. The first one, I'll say that this model has a hold harmless, which means that no matter what you hear about this formula, no university gets less money than before the model passes, right? Every university is better off. But that being said, the universities can and do spend the funds that they currently get from the state on all their operations and serving students. And so we have to calculate that. We have to use that to say this is a resource that our universities are drawing on. Then we have to think about how much they're getting from students. This part got a little bit trickier, right? Because we don't want to just say, hey, SIU collected this amount from its students last year, so they should collect this much next year. That would be baking in the kind of inequity and unaffordability. Oh, sorry, is there a question?
Hold on real quick, Mike. Also, y'all feel free to interrupt and ask questions if anything doesn't make sense. We can handle it. So interrupt it.
And then the 4 top universities that utilize the research grant, they get most of the money. So I just wanted to make it, they're trying to make it not so that the top universities get all the money, but that everybody gets equal funding. So I just wanted to make that clear.
No, I appreciate that. No questions? Everybody good? All right, go ahead, Mike.
Okay. And yeah, as you said, I'm happy to field any questions throughout too. So we didn't want to bake into the formula how much universities are currently collecting in tuition and fees because they're collecting too much. We know that. So instead, we again looked at the student population of every university, and we created like basically a formula that says this is your student body. This is what you can reasonably collect from that student body. We use those two elements, how much they currently get from the state and how much they can reasonably collect from their student body, and that makes up the resource profile. So you have what each university needs to spend to serve its students. You have how much they currently have, you subtract how much they currently have by what they need, and you have this gap for each university called the adequacy gap. You add up all of the adequacy gaps for every university together, and you have this $1.7 billion of additional funding, annual funding ask, that we would ramp up to over 15 years with $135 million annual increases. This is what we're asking for with this formula to get every university to 100% adequacy. And it's a big ask, but I'll talk more about that ask in a bit. The other important thing you have to know about this formula, as if it wasn't complex enough, but again, I stand by this as being the right way to give out funding, is we're not going to get that whole $1.7 billion of additional annual funding tomorrow, unless you guys know something I don't. So it really matters how you give out whatever additional funding you have in every given year. How you triage that, let's say $135 million of funding next year really matters, right? So we do that based off of the adequacy gap for each university. So every university, we look at their percentage, how far by percentage they are away from adequacy. Maybe they're at 50% of adequacy. And then we also look at how much in terms of dollars they are away from adequacy. So if they're $100 million away from adequacy, we look at that too. We look at that across all universities, and we prioritize the funding in each given year based off of those two factors. The last thing I should say is that this whole thing is dynamic too. So if your university enrolls an additional 1,000 students from low-income backgrounds, then the formula takes that into account and makes sure that the adequacy target grows so that your state funding is going to supporting those students. All right, that's the formula. Now,
Real quick, we got a question
yeah,
in the room, Mike.
yeah.
Did you hear that question, Mike?
No. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, basically the question is, in terms of the resource profiles that we calculate for each institution, is that calculated on an annual basis based on the new budgets that they get each year?
Great question. Yes. Every year the resource profile is updated based off of, first, how much funding did they get from the state last year? And second, what their enrollment is, so that it is dynamically updated, like the estimated amount that they can collect from their student population. There's some other nuance in there and details that I'd be happy to talk about, but that's yes, is the short answer there.
Thank you.
Yep. And yeah, if there's any other questions, just stop me. But you will have to repeat them because I can't hear the audience.
Yeah, I got you. I got you.
Awesome. Okay, on the next slide, this is the kind of like payoff slide where, well, kind of literally, where you can see if we were to give out all the funding tomorrow, this is where it would go. So we're looking at all 12 universities here. The bottom row of these numbers and boxes shows the percentage of adequacy that each university is at. That ranges from 46% to 89%. Now, you might notice that no university is at or above 100%. We think every university needs to have more funding to serve its students. The blue in those bars above it are the current resources that universities have. The orange is what they would get for the formula, and then that little top hat at the top is like their total funding if we were to fund this whole thing tomorrow. Another thing you might notice, and this maybe dispels some of the things that if you've heard things negative about this model, is that every university benefits by millions and millions of dollars. So no university is harmed. I'll just name it. We've heard a lot from the University of Illinois that this formula could harm their institution. You can look at it here and see that hundreds of millions of additional dollars would go to the University of Illinois system every single year. If being hurt means getting hundreds of millions of additional dollars, then you can. Then I would be willing to be hurt in that way. But basically, every university benefits because we know that all our universities have been underfunded for decades. So this essentially just shifts back the equation to closer to where it should be. It wasn't that long ago, just in 2008, where the state paid for about 75% of what our universities needed, and the students covered 25%. Now that's flipped. So now the state only covers 35% of public universities and funding, and 65% is required from the students. Across the nation, states cover about 60% of public universities funding, and students are only expected to cover 40%. So this would not bring us back to 2008, but it would put us in line with right about exactly in line with what we see around the country in terms of how much states are expected to cover of public university funding. Okay, this is, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this table on this next slide, but it really drills home this nobody is harmed message. Basically, on the far right table here, you can see that is what we were asking all institutions this is what the EF model would give to each institution with the recommended $135 million increase this year. You can see the millions of dollars every university would get. On the far left, this is what a status quo best case scenario distribution would be. So when opponents say, hey, this is not how we should be doing it, we're doing it fine the way it is, what they're advocating for is the left side of this chart. They're saying, what we really just want is a 3% inflationary increase, which is really not an increase at all, across the board, the same way we've always done it. Now, what you'll notice is that every single institution and system benefits from the far right side, from what we're asking for here. I'll look at SIU system. The last year, if this model was funded and passed, the SIU system would get $24 million. Across the board, a 3% would have given them $6.6 million. However, even that across the board 3% is completely unrealistic, right? What we actually saw is in the middle here. What we saw is that universities got a 1% increase, which means that the SIU system, instead of getting $23 million or $24 million, they got $2 million to serve students, right? That is not enough to keep prices low. It's not enough to serve students. It's just not enough, period. And that 1% is actually a lot more in line with what we can expect moving forward if we don't pass this formula. When we analyze what's happened over the last 30 years, the status quo is actually a lot closer to getting that 1% than even just getting a 3% let's adjust for inflation increase. Okay. As if I couldn't have gotten into the weeds enough, accountability gets really, really into the weeds. I love talking about accountability. I'm so interested in this stuff, but I'll try not to get too wonky with it. Basically, it really matters how you hold institutions accountable for spending this influx of new funding, right? We are asking for a lot of new funding for universities, and we need to make sure that they have transparency, and this formula would do that. It would require all sorts of data collection and publishing that we've never seen before that would connect revenues to what they're actually spending it on. Like right now, if by some amazing miracle we did get $20 million, right, we would have no idea really where that money was spent on and how it affected students' outcomes and enrollment. This would turn that around so that we have really granular accounting for how this will be spent. Institutions have to make plans and be really mindful and planful for how they're doing that. And then ultimately, they're held accountable for spending it in ways that benefit students. And then as they approach adequacy, making sure that their enrollment is reflecting their goals and that of the state and populations of this that reflect the state. and that they are improving outcomes with that additional funding, right? We're making sure that the funding is not just going toward, but also achieving what we need it to do. If not, there are real world consequences, right? There's more data reporting to start with, but then looking closer at best practices and are universities doing what they need to do with those fundings and with that funding, and ultimately the possibility of pausing that funding if we're not seeing the results that we need to. This method of accountability, without going into this whole thing, it is a far better method of accountability. It doesn't hurt students basically in the way that we've seen a lot of other accountability mechanisms do. And if you're interested in more information on accountability, I'm happy to talk about it. On the next slide, it talks a little bit more too about this, and I won't go into depth, but basically, we can't expect that we give a couple $1 million more to an institution and they improve their 6-year graduation rate overnight, right? Because it's a 6-year graduation rate, takes years. What we can say is, hey, with this extra millions of dollars, how are you spending it? And then how are you using that to make your university more affordable for your students? And then how is that turning around enrollment? And finally, as we approach adequacy over the years, how are we seeing these outcomes improve? All right, so at the final slide, our, I think, conservative estimates for what this formula would do by the time it's fully funded. So we fund it for 15 years. At the end of that, every year we're seeing 15,200 more college graduates. So just by that end of that 15 years, we're going to have 122,000 more graduates than we otherwise would have had in Illinois. Those graduates will contribute about $700 million every year in more tax revenue. Those graduates will mean that the state will have to pay about $160 million less per year in Medicaid, SNAP, incarceration. Those graduates will again spend $5.3 billion more in their local economies and contribute $340 million more in local taxes. So the most common question we're getting here is, how are we going to pay for this formula? Fair enough. I would counter by saying, if we don't pass this formula, how will we pay for anything else in 15 years? Because this is the future of our state we're talking about. And if we want to have a robust and inclusive economy, we have to pass and fund this formula so that we are preparing our students for the jobs of the future, and that we are having this kind of socioeconomic mobility that I think is the foundation for the American dream. So with that, happy to take any questions.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, so this question, Mike, was about accountability. I think the question is, besides enrollment and graduation rates, what other data can be used to make sure that the money is being spent the right way and to hold administration accountable?
I love this question. It's a great one. So I think that there's something in between enrollment and graduation rate. First of all, there are metrics that we can look at that are really important. I think they're called early momentum indicators. Things like how many credits are students attempting, how many credits are they passing. I also, so that's like one answer for what we can look at in terms of outcomes without having to wait 6 years for that graduation rate. One piece of feedback we've gotten a lot throughout this process is, how do we know the money is going to be spent in ways that actually benefit students? So, we have this, like, we've heard from professors who say, I'm a English professor, I'm not an academic counselor, but I have to also be an academic counselor. And I also have to be a transfer coordinator because my school can't afford to hire, like, we've had to lay those people off or can't afford to hire them. So what this formula will do, will look at spending so that if your university hires more academic counselors and transfer coordinators, then we'll look at how that additional funding is being spent there, and then also how it translates to some of those indicators. For example, if you hire more transfer coordinators, the hope would be we're seeing more transfer credits accepted. So that's like kind of one hypothetical example of how a holistic accountability committee, which I didn't really talk much about, but there's a whole committee of people who will hold institutions accountable rather than just having some kind of like algorithmic accountability system that wouldn't account really for all of the things we want to see in our complex environment. Um, I'll be honest, I'm speaking a little bit hypothetically because some of these things need to be fleshed out. You can see if you want to, in your free time, read 60 pages of legislative material, language, exactly what it says there. There's still some fleshing out to do, which would happen basically in rulemaking and in implementation. But the bones are there in the legislation for a truly like unique, innovative way of holding institutions accountable.
Any other questions? I had a question, Mike.
Yeah.
So we talked about in this slide here, the recommended 3% increase versus the actual 1% increase. With the new funding formula, it looks like the $135 million is what would be expected. But how do we account for example, the 2% decrease in what schools actually got? How would that projected versus actuals be different with the new formula?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I hope that we never see again what we saw this last year. I didn't really touch on it, but last year, basically, very confusingly, and this happened with no other part of the budget. The governor's office said in and with the budget that we are allocating 3% increase to higher education if they need it for extraordinary circumstances, and if not, they'll get 1%. Um, and only 1% was ever given out. Now, we've never had an explanation for what extraordinary circumstances mean. If the last year wasn't extraordinary circumstances for higher education, I truly cannot tell you what would be, right? They've seen attacks on the federal level. There's just been, I could go on forever about all the things that universities have had to endure in the last year, yet they only saw that 1%. I truly don't think we'll see that again. There's been a lot of pushback from that. But still, the greater question is what happens if we don't get that full $135 million, right? I will say that I truly believe that if this formula passes, we will see a great reinvestment in our universities, even if it's not $135 million every single year for 15 years. I think it's a lot more than what we would see if we just try to keep doing business as usual. But whatever funding we do get will be given out equitably through this formula. And I do think the formula does a great job of triaging the funds to the universities that need them most. And I think that there's enough room in a $55 billion budget where the main pushback has been, well, if we don't get the whole $135 million, then our university is going to get hurt. I don't believe that to be true. I think there's enough room in a $55 billion budget to make sure that we get enough every year that universities are all far, far better off.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for this presentation. I know every time you give it, I learn a lot, so I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, so let me arrange my tech here. I believe that's the end of that presentation. I'm going to pull up another screen. I think. I am. I got it. I thought I had it. Yeah, so 100%. So you could take a picture of the link up at the top if you like. You can also just go to transformhigheredil.org, click on Take Action, and it's going to take you to the same place. But basically what this is our legislative advocacy toolkit. So all day, what we've been talking about is student activism, students being the facilitators of change, not only on campuses, but also in society. That looks like a few different ways, right? That looks like demonstrating on campus. That looks like having conversations with institutional decision makers. That looks like talking to your peers and educating them as well. It also looks like talking to the folks that make the decisions about the actual money, the folks that we elect into office. And so what this toolkit is designed to do is help you use your voice in a number of different ways that the legislators will be paying attention to. I shouldn't say the legislator, your legislator will be paying attention to. So in this toolkit, we will be talking about two main things: the adequate and equitable funding formula that Mike just went through, and then the monetary award program, which some of y'all might be familiar with, is our need-based aid program here in the state of Illinois. So those are the two main things that we're going to be advocating for. They're super duper related. Um, Obviously, both of these are about affordability and access of higher education for students. So with this toolkit, this is actually really, 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 really cool. And shout out to our coalition for designing this. But it basically, if you go to this landing page, it will walk you through everything. It'll walk you through, and I'll show you. You can get into social media advocacy. This should be minimalized. You can get into social media advocacy, and we've laid out even a schedule of dates, texts, and pictures that you can use. Also, it has folks tagged, so you can insert your legislators' handles, and it'll go directly to them. Obviously, we're past March, so we're into April, but we can still use all of these other tweets if you like. This works for LinkedIn, Twitter, X, whatever it is now, pretty much all social media. We also have Advocacy Day that's coming up actually on Thursday. So this is a version of advocacy where we're actually going to go to their field, right? We're going to their stadium. We're going to go down to Springfield, or up to Springfield, I should say, and actually talk to the legislators in their offices, talk to them about the MAP grant and expanding its funding, talking about the equitable funding formula, galvanizing the actual legislators, and asking them to talk to their peers so that we can eventually pass it out of committee and get it signed into law. So this one is very, very special. If anybody randomly finds themselves in Springfield on Thursday, come say hi at the Capitol building. These are more tweets about, or I should say, social media posts about Advocacy Day. We also have instructions on how to set up a one-on-one meeting with your legislator. So we're going to be doing that at Advocacy Day, but y'all can do this whenever you want. They are employees, right? They are working, and that is their job. So step by step, we can show you how to find your legislator, exactly how to contact them with all their contact information, both their home office and their Springfield office. It's actually pretty easy to find them. And we have a whole website, the Illinois General Assembly website, which I am very, very excited to say has finally been updated. It was very much so Microsoft like 95 coded. It looked wild. But like in the last 6 months or so, it caught up to the decade. So it's really easy to navigate and it's really awesome. But literally all of the state legislators' profiles are there. So you can see what committees they sit on. You can see their voting records. You can see what bills they are sponsors and champions of. You can see a whole bunch of information. Most importantly, you can call them. So you can find their phone numbers through that website. You could also click this contact your legislator button here, and it will pull up their phone number. And then last but not least, my favorite thing about this toolkit is, yes, it's 2026, but yes, letters are actually still important, even though they're digital now, but letters are still important. And so we have a tool here for you to be able to send a pre-filled letter out to your state senator or your state representative, and literally let them know what you're advocating for. The cool thing about this letter is you can send it as is. It's already standardized. It's already formatted. Or you can edit it. So you can add your own personal stories, personal feedback, personal questions that you want to ask to it as well. It still gets sent to your legislative staff and they discuss it, talk about it, etc. And also, if you are a constituent, they likely will follow up with you too, because they represent you. They kind of have to. All right. So that is the toolkit. We also have some additional information and resources. We have postcards, we got one pagers and flyers, we've got talking points, we've got literal whole pages worth of, if you want to dive deep into the weeds. You should probably call Mike first and then also look at some of these fact sheets because they do a great job of breaking down every single portion of the bill itself. The other cool thing about this toolkit is it is live. So anytime that the coalition gets any new information, new updates, if there's a new call to action to say something different to your legislators, we are constantly updating this page. So even if you don't take an action right now, when you do it tomorrow morning, right when you wake up, there may be some updated information, some updated context. So I would encourage folks to regularly visit this page simply just for the information, but also we'll keep it up to date with the most relevant and hopefully strategic messaging to make sure that you're reaching your legislators. Any questions about this toolkit? Any questions about the equitable funding formula or the MAP grant? Any questions about academic freedom or right to learn? Y'all should have questions on that one. But you could also watch the recording on YouTube. I think it's available now. I think I saw it already. Tomorrow morning? Okay, perfect. That is pretty much all that I have. I appreciate y'all so much for being here, listening to me ramble and to Mike ramble. I really appreciate y'all taking your time to just find out some more information. I think it's a huge step. It's very, very important. And yes, I hope that you all continue to engage. I hope you all continue to be active and activated. And I hope to see you all very, very, very soon again. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Caldwell.
You do better than that for Mr. Troy. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for leading these critical and courageous conversations. They were absolutely necessary for our campus. For those of you who are joining us on our system YouTube, thank you so much for being here. We will be actually headed to Carbondale tomorrow to repeat these exact discussions from 10:30 to 12 on students' right to learn, which again was outstanding, as well as educating our students about access and affordability on the Illinois Equitable Public Funding Formula. And I think that's also something I want to highlight. I think Mr. Mike Aberson spoke about, I think he said 57 meetings. Like, I just want you all to know that hits close to home because President Mahoney, as well as myself and Dr. Elamine at the School of Medicine, we served on that commission for 2.5 years. So I just want to let you all know that this is a serious issue that's facing Illinois. And one of the examples I remember, Advance Illinois is another partner with the coalition, and they have a lot of excellent data. So this is what I want you all to know about what we're trying to do. Our K through 12 system was like number 46, 47 on the list before they did equitable funding in K through 12. Once they completed that, they went to number 12 nationally. So you're like probably one of the worst in the state to in the top, practically top 10 in the state, right? So that's what we're trying to do with higher ed, is to make sure that throughout the entire education pipeline, our students are having access to equitable funding, equitable opportunities, and not only can you come to a school like SIUE, but that you can graduate. That's why this is really important to us. So I would really encourage you to, if you didn't see the whole conversation, if you have more questions, so please check out the system YouTube channel. I want to thank the students. We're here because of you. We would not exist without you. So we really appreciate your engagement and your commitment and just for you being here today. And we want to encourage you, even implore you to continue to lend your voice to these topics because you are the leaders in this space and it impacts you the most and your voice matters. And we want you to know that you're valued, that you're seen as well as heard. So please continue to engage with Mr. Troy Ling, with the Young Invincibles, and also us as well. I want to give a shout out and thank you to Mr. David Brooks, our technical expert. We would not have been able to have this conversation without you today. I want to thank Southern Illinois University Edwardsville for their hospitality, the ADE office, the Kimmel Belonging and Engagement Hub, and then of course Ms. Doris Williams with the SIU system who facilitated and organized all this as well. So we're very grateful for her. I know that we're getting close to finals and graduation, so I want to say good luck to each of you on your finals and also congratulations to our 2026 graduates. So again, we appreciate you all being here today and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.